I'm David Gallagher. I was, up to a year and a half ago, a Chilean ambassador in London. I started life as an academic, lecturing at Oxford. I then became an investment banker. And then when I sold my investment banking business, I became ambassador in London. So that's roughly me.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hello, I'm Anna McMorrin. I'm the MP for Cardiff North, the Labour MP for Cardiff North, and I'm also the Shadow Minister for Latin America and the Caribbean. I was appointed in the reshuffle in September. I've been a Member of Parliament since 2017, and at the moment working hard on our shadow foreign policy with David Lammy within our team, in the hope that we're successful at the next election and become the government, and then are able to work hard in raising all things Latin America. And we know the importance of that. My background is that I was a special advisor in the Welsh Government on climate, energy, and then I worked with the UN in the run-up to the Paris Climate Agreement and on sustainable development and on climate issues, representing states and regions right across the world. So I've had some foreign policy experience, but it's great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm David Lelliott. I'm the British ambassador in San Salvador. I've been there for about 4.5 years now. I've been a diplomat for over 30 years. Obviously, I started as a child. And during that time, I've worked all over the place in Africa, the Middle East, India, Gibraltar, and of most relevance here, Mexico.
Hi, my name is Vitoria Nabas. I am a Brazilian, also Portuguese, and an English solicitor. I have been working all this 23 years that I've been working here in the UK with immigration. I'm also a trustee in Cunning House that you heard before here with Jeremy Brown this morning. I'm a trustee also in the Brazilian Institute in King's College that Vinicius also mentioned here before. And I work very close to the Latin American communities that are based in the UK.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brian Fonseca. I direct the Institute for Public Policy at Florida International University. I also teach in the Department of Politics and International Relations. I've spent the better part of the last 20 years bouncing between the Department of Defense and the university. So it's been quite a schizophrenic life, but nonetheless had the opportunity to sort of spend significant amounts of time working on defense policy, but also shaping thinking from an academic perspective.
Thank you. Well, I think the idea of the panel today is to, I believe the microphones are working? Yeah, okay. The idea of the panel today, I think we're going to mention quite a lot of things that were mentioned in the morning, but in the context, the very special context of how we can communicate better in diplomatic relations, how we can cooperate either as Latin Americans with the UK, or between Latin American countries, or between Latin America and other countries, and so on. I was ambassador very recently here in the UK, and I'll just run through very, very quickly some of the things one had to do. I mean, we had a very, very close relationship on defense. We had good relations generally. We had a lot of climate change work because we were doing COP25 and the UK was doing COP26. We worked an enormous amount on health, particularly in the pandemic. The UK was an incredible help in vaccines, and we helped with clinical trials in Chile and so on. We had help from the Metropolitan Police on police human rights, which because we had this social uprising in which there were some accidents. Enormous amount of cultural activity. Education, 1,000 Chilean students paid by the Chilean government doing post-grad courses in UK universities. UK became the most popular destination for Chilean students in the world, passing the United States. And a lot of discussion on public policy issues. So, and if I can start with you, if supposing in a few months' time, and not too long in the future, you're no longer acting Minister of the Americas, but actual Minister of the Americas, what would your priorities be in relations with Latin America?
Yeah, thank you very much. Firstly, I want to start by saying that foreign policy has never been so important. We've never seen a time of such global shift. And it has never before shaped, as much as it does now, the lives of people here at home in Britain. So I think we've got to start with that premise that actually foreign policy, foreign affairs, what is happening globally is impacting us hugely here at home. We're seeing huge rise in energy bills, we're seeing inflation, we're seeing the challenges the economic challenges, social challenges that we see here at home. We see not least climate challenges. I've actually just got back from Antarctica. I was there over Christmas, went down with the British Antarctic Survey, came back through Chile. That was a fascinating visit to see Chile and Chile's relationship with Antarctica, but also to understand how Antarctica seems so far away to all of us. It is. It's a long way away, believe me. It took 5 days from the Falklands to get there by ship. But what is happening there impacts us here at home. It impacts us globally. We have all got a duty on us, and Labour is certainly putting that as a priority, to act and make sure that we are taking action so that what happens there does not impact the rest of the world to the detriment of communities far and wide. And we know that communities across the Americas are suffering hugely from climate change, climate risk, not least here at home. And I think more and more people are becoming aware of that. And that is something that's going to be at the top priority for a Labour government, and certainly across my desk. I would want climate to be one of the top challenges we face. I think the other equally important thing is that we've seen, and not to get too political here, but we've seen 14 years of a Conservative government. We've also seen a real challenge in how we are viewed across the world. We have lost our reputation and reputational standing, our global standing in the world. That needs to be restored. We need to start reconnecting people, reconnecting places, reconnecting communities. That will also be a top priority for me and for the whole of the foreign team if we're in government.
Excellent, thank you very much. Let's get back to climate change afterwards, because I think that's a huge topic. David, you've been in countries where there's been quite a lot of conflict. Sudan, for instance. You're now in Salvador. So you're, I think, an expert on conflict solutions. You're also in a country which has a president who's much discussed, and in some circles much admired, in other circles feared, probably. So what is your take on what can you tell us about your experience and how other countries could learn from it?
Well, I think one of the things about conflicts is every country is different, every conflict is different. There are some common tools that can be used. I think if we look at specifically at the El Salvador example, the experience with the gangs, I think it's very important to recognize the progress that has been made on security and the impact that has on the lives of ordinary Salvadorans. The huge impact they suffered for a long time at the hands of the gangs. And I think the challenge now is how you move out of a state of exception and restore constitutional safeguards, ensure respect for human rights and a functioning justice system. And there are ample examples from around the world where countries have done that, where countries have built up institutional independence, moved to increase the independence of the judiciary and ensure appropriate sort of checks and balances. In terms of what other countries can learn from El Salvador, I actually think it's a challenge. It will be a challenge to replicate the Salvadoran model in other countries. I think there are very few presidents or leaders who have the same level of control, the supermajority that President Bukele had through his party in the Congress, in the Assembly, was absolutely crucial. And therefore the sort of unified control over the different sort of state organizations. I'm sure lots of presidents would love to have that. I think very few have it in practice. I think also the degree of popularity he had with ordinary Salvadorans and the level of trust and confidence they have has been crucial. So I think other countries will need to look at perhaps some more conventional models. And I think one of the key things is obviously there needs to be a sort of holistic approach. On the one hand, yes, you need to tackle the hard security end of problems of gangs and violent crime. On the other, you have to recognize that sometimes people join these structures because they don't have much else in their life. And therefore, once you break the power of the gangs, you also need to bring that kind of economic development. And that, again, is where foreign countries can help, because we as the UK, many other countries, have programs working on issues from climate change to female empowerment, to human rights, to capacity building, and so on, which can help with the economic development. And of course, commercial links. We have, across Latin America, there are active British chambers of commerce, we have trade agreements, we have British companies who are contributing to the development of countries alongside our various NGOs.
Is the circumvention of human rights probably easier in a small country like Salvador? I mean, I can't imagine it being all that easy in Brazil or even Chile. I mean, it's impossible.
I think, in terms of facilitating the state of exception, it was the degree, the size of the majority.
Right.
Most checks and balances that existed assumed that no one would ever have a majority. And since the end of the Civil War and the implementation of the peace agreement in the early 1990s, no party had ever had even a simple majority in the Assembly, let alone a supermajority. So effectively, most of the checks and balances were rendered effective through the ballot box.
Yeah.
And I think that's key. So in that sense, yes, it's obviously much harder for presidents in other countries to get that size of majority in the Assembly.
Thank you. Vitoria, soft power, what kind, we were talking last night about what the UK could contribute in respect of its legal system to countries in Latin America, for instance. And that seemed very interesting, and despite the fact that the UK has common law and we in Latin America tend to have civil code law, including that, I mean, what kind of soft power good influences can countries have over each other, and can the UK have over Latin America?
I think I can take a little bit off of the speech from Anna about this relationship, creating relationship. I think that the perception of UK in Latin America, it's better from the perception of Latin America in UK. And I think this is the first thing we need to change. And this comes from all areas, including the rule of law, and the changes that come in the foreign relationship, trade. We see the trade that is absolutely small in Latin America and UK, could be much better. But saying really in the sense of legislation, I've been working for many years with the Law Society and the Bar Council, going to Latin America, especially Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil, by the size of the countries, the size of the legal system there, and trying to work in partnership with the locals. And yes, I am a Brazilian lawyer and I'm a UK solicitor, but I'm not in Mexico or Colombia, but I still work with my peers there and trying to understand their problems. I've been solicitors there, lawyers there, and I would say, problems here or solutions that we can work together. It doesn't matter the system. The rule of law is rule of law, period. And non-corruption, the system is non-corruption, the system. Doesn't matter what system. So it has been really interesting. Unfortunately, I would say after COVID, we are in a kind of a little bit of a blend. We haven't done anything. I have to nudge the Law Society. But until the COVID time, we had several trade missions. We had several events in common. We were bringing Latin American lawyers to the UK to do like courses here, to train them here. We have been working a lot in the international arbitration. That is something that doesn't matter where you're from, and you can work in both systems. So I think the legal area is really important and can be a real soft power that Latin America can exercise here and vice versa. Should not be just one way, should be both ways. And I think that this interrelationship needs to restart. I think we have broke it in some way, somehow, I don't know when, in a little bit. But we need to reconnect. Yeah. I think that there was a huge amount of relation between UK and Brazil, for example. Of course, I will say Brazil because of where I come from. That we don't see anymore nowadays, or as much as was. We need to reconnect. I think that's absolutely important. And this could be maybe in education, in law, in trade, in everything. We have so much space to do it. We could be doing much better. That's my view on that.
Thank you. Brian, you've written some interesting things. There's an article in Foreign Affairs I read of yours, which said China's exploiting the US police void in Latin America. There are all sorts of voids in Latin America, I think, which are being exploited by China, actually. In the case of the police void, our police has had advice from the UK, from Spain, particularly when we had riots in 2019, to deal with how to deal with riots and not infringe human rights. It's a very difficult area. But could you tell us more about this and in general about your work in security issues between the US and LATAM?
No, I'd be happy to. I'll take the piece that I co-authored with my colleague at the university, Leland Lazarus. The spirit of that piece was really to highlight the fact that we had observed a surge in Chinese civil security engagement throughout Latin America and the Caribbean, actually globally. And we sort of juxtaposed that against the deep relationships that the US military has all across the region, and sort of saw that as perhaps a wrinkle in the way sort of China was thinking about engagement in the broader security sector. Much of the security issues that plague the region are domestic in nature. Military's roles are somewhat challenged and constrained about, in the context of doing security work within the country. The absence of interstate conflict, despite the recent flare-up between Venezuela and Guyana, I think is still quite marginal. And so I think the engagement through and to civilian security partners in the region was a means by which China was able to deepen its relationships in the security space, proliferate technology, right, surveillance systems and other civilian security technologies, and again, expand beyond sort of the central government, working with local level civilian security institutions. And so, again, the spirit of that piece was really to sort of flag that kind of engagement that we saw China increasing, not just, again, in the region, but it was a sort of global phenomenon that we were observing. And so we wanted to highlight that, particularly highlight it for sort of US policymakers to think about how to engage more meaningfully through the civilian security sector. Because frankly, and as you heard from colleagues before, the US Department of Defense has incredible deep relationships with militaries across the region. And so pivoting and being more expansive to include civilian security, we thought was a good move for policymakers to start contemplating. With respect to some of the other work, I'll make maybe a bold or provocative statement, and that is, I think that it's a mistake to think that governments are exclusive in terms of how nations engage each other. I think that governments certainly have a vital role in the relations among states, but there's so many non-governmental actors that really help deepen the relationships among nations. I mean, from the U.S. perspective, and an anecdote from my time in El Salvador, there are as many Salvadorans living in the United States that are from El Salvador or first, second generation American from El Salvador than there are living in El Salvador. And every summer, if you hop on a plane from the United States to El Salvador and you look in the back of the plane, there are about 20 young people going on missions to El Salvador. They're in the bright pink shirts, right? They sort of cover the back of the plane. And so they are an extension in many ways of sort of American foreign policy, or they could be, if thought of intentionally. And of course, you'd have to come back with pollo campero. I don't know if you do that, but certainly. But nonetheless, I mean, the point of that is that there are a lot of non-state actors that are deeply engaged in the region, and I'm not sure governments are intentional enough about how they, sort of fold those organizations into advancing foreign policy interests. I'll say that I've observed that, certainly U.S. rivals have done, in some ways, a more sophisticated job of intentionally engaging their diaspora communities, leveraging their media outlets, and again, leveraging non-state actors to advance foreign policy influence. And governments like Russia and China will often engage to and through their private sectors, their media outlets, their diaspora organizations to advance foreign policy in very selfish ways. And I think it's because they have factored these non-state, non-governmental organizations in their composition of foreign policy tools. And so it's something that I think we're starting to expand more of, leveraging academic institutions, for example, the people-to-people contacts. And so I put a lot of focus on thinking about how we go from, in the United States, we went within the Department of Defense to the concept of joint, where different military branches work together, and then whole of government, where different government branches are working together, to whole of society. We start thinking about how the private sector and civil society organizations, religious organizations, kind of fold into how we think about governing really complex problems. And I think the same can be said about expanding that concept throughout the Americas to sort of a whole of Americas, whole of hemisphere concept, in which we're blending all of these state and non-state actors together in sort of optimal ways to deal with really complex and challenging security issues. I'll leave it there, but hopefully we can talk more about that.
Thank you. I want to go back maybe for Anna and Vitoria to the rule of law and also to education. I think one of the great contributions the UK makes to the young world is its universities. And we have a situation now, as I said before, in Chile we have 1,000, on average 1,000 postgrads paid by the Chilean government here. But they're now getting, the ones who are applying for the first time, they're getting emails from their university saying they can't bring any dependents. And what happens is that Chilean students typically marry before they come to do a postgrad, and maybe they have 1 or 2 babies before they get here. And this has been a tremendous shock. Some of them have already been approved by the universities and so on. And that seems a great pity. I mean, I sometimes wonder, I mean, I don't know whether I should. I'm an ex-ambassador, so I can say things with. The Home Office sometimes seems to interfere with the Foreign Office. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that you now have to make Salvadorians get a visa to come on holiday in the UK. So.
For Salvadorans?
Salvadorans, yeah.
Salvadorans and Hondurans.
Yeah.
And Hondurans, yeah.
But that was due to increases, sustained, significant increases in the numbers. Yeah.
And the sort of related question is, I mean, without rule of law, there's no security. And I think rule of law is a little bit on the decline, even in some parts of Europe. And who knows about the United States. So that really is important, because I think the UK is a really stable country. And together with that, there's a question of increasing polarization in the world, and certainly in Latin America. And the UK is a lot less polarized, although you may not think so, but I've looked at from the Labour Party is a pretty moderate party. And it would be lovely to think, again, I'm probably speaking out of turn, but I'd love to see a sort of Labour government influencing the left in Latin America, which has gone far to the extreme.
Okay, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of questions there. I think I'll start with rule of law, because I think that this Conservative government has left our reputation for rule of law in absolute tatters. We have been seen globally to have broken the law here at home through trying to push through bills that, quite frankly, will break international law, not least our law here at home, to challenge courts. And just, I think that all ties in to our reduced standing in the world, but it also ties into here at home and globally that reduced confidence in politicians and in governments to make change and make change for the better. And that's a really, really sad, sorry position to be in. I mean, just to tell you that, if I'm out as a Labour MP, if I'm out knocking on doors, I've been to a few of the by-elections we've got going on at the moment, knocking on doors, the belief in politicians is gone completely. It's, you're all the same. And this is what I'm afraid to say, this is what Johnson, this is what successive government who have just been seen to absolutely take things for granted, but also just tear up everything in their way to get what they want. And that's whether that's through COVID, contracts, rule of law, international law, the Rwanda policy, all of these issues.
It's any consolation, in Latin America, politicians have a 5% rating.
I think that will lead. Yeah. So that, along with journalists, and I think we're all down there. But I think the important thing is here, and my point is that we need to build back that standing. We need to make sure that there's trust. There's trust in government. There's trust in politicians to do things, make better relationships, better decisions, and build those bridges for, as you say, a really, that we are at risk, security is at risk in the world now. We are seeing an ever-changing, challenging situations with some pretty awful actions from countries and leaders happening right now. We need to be coming together with our counterparts, with our colleagues, and building those bridges, whether that's through government to government, whether that is through university work, whether that is through making sure that we're simplifying the immigration system so that students can come here and bring their family, bring their partner, and make sure that we can be an open country to build those partnerships. We are a very rich country here of technologies, universities, all sorts of science, all sorts of exciting things. I talked earlier about Antarctica. We are leading the world with the US on Antarctic science. We have this incredible ship, the Sir David Attenborough. That is the envy of the world in terms of what we're doing. We need to be using that more. We need to be working, Chile, Argentina, a lot of countries do a lot of work on climate science. Costa Rica, some fantastic work on climate and sustainability. We need to be doing a lot more with our partners, working and building those bridges. And it doesn't just have to be at government level. It can be through the softer powers, the university, chevening scholars are really important in this. But we're being hampered. And we're being hampered by the Home Office, we're being hampered by these Conservatives. We're using aid money at the moment, aid money to prop up a failing asylum system. Aid money is going into looking after asylum seekers in hotels. That's just a shocking state for our government to be in. So, Labour will change that, absolutely, first and foremost.
Vitoria?
Don't feel so bad about politicians. Don't forget that we, immigration solicitors, were called lefties because we defend people that are immigrants. This is our job, okay? We are doing our job, what we study and paid for, so.
I think lawyers, politicians, we're all about.
And journalists.
Journalists.
Same level. I would say that, unfortunately, UK, and I'm not going to even go politics here, but UK is losing it. It's losing brain. It's losing the people that were coming here, and I'm telling you because I have more than 2 decades of experience in seeing people coming here and doing their best, studying, working, giving their experience, starting businesses. A lot of them in tech and science, and they just got fed up with this huge amount of costs that are now to do any kind of a visa. This is absolutely appalling. The prices now are absurd. If you get a family with like a husband and wife and 2 kids, they will spend more than 10K just in home office fees to renew a visa.
Yeah.
It is absolutely crazy. You don't get this in the US. So why would I stay here if I can go to the US or Canada or Australia? It's just obvious, guys. And without being really mean, this is an island this tiny. I'm British, by the way. I'm not criticized. I'm British, by the way. This is an island this tiny. US? Sure. So it's very difficult for me to see what is being wasted, what's being lost. And this is soft power. This this good brains that we are losing because they cannot come here anymore, because they cannot bring their family. And they're not going to leave their wife or kids or husband and kids or whatever, because, of course, who will? Who would leave their families? So, yes, we are losing. We are losing. And whatever needs to be done to change this, I'm in. So I will be in, because we will be losing power if this continues. And losing power means we are going to be losing any influence that we had in the world in the past.
Is it, Vitoria, a question for Brian also, I mean, is it legitimate to distinguish between good immigration and bad immigration? Because we're losing scientists, what about, in Latin America, there's a lot of really, certainly southwards, which I know more about than the northwards. There's a lot of criminal immigration, and that which comes with cartels and so on. And immigration gets a bad name for that reason, and then xenophobia kicks in, and then somebody like Trump exploits it and so on. How do you do it? I mean, the Australians have all this point system. I don't know. I mean,
I separate illegal immigration and illegal immigration, not good or bad. Right. Also, because good or bad is something very relative. What's good for me maybe is not for you. So illegal and illegal immigration. Legal immigration is all the immigration that can be done via the legal system. And of course, I'm in favor of the legal immigration. This is what I'm here as a solicitor to do about. And refugees could be legal also, if they have a proper case, if they are running for, and they are in fear of anything that is related to something real. Yes, this is legal immigration, and I'm absolutely in favor. And we can create mechanisms. All countries have, well, several countries have good mechanisms on that. Illegal immigration, I will never be in favor of that. And I would be always like happy to discuss how can we avoid them, prevent them, and help these people to not do anything wrong. If you ask me, oh, would you help anybody to just run from one country to another? No, it's really wrong. It's wrong, it feeds wrong people, systems, corrupt people, like I would say bandidos. So no, legal immigration, definitely yes. And legal immigration, you will have everything from brains to refugees that are really qualified people that cannot work because they have to wait to be approved. That takes forever. When we have people that are qualified in medical or health kind of qualification and are waiting 3 years without being able to work, living on vouchers, and why they cannot work. It's not, for me, feasible to understand.
Well, first let me say thank you for not adding academics to that list of. Although they do say the saying is.
If you want, I can do it.
We probably should, but they say those that can do, those that can't teach, and so I went to teach. But no, I mean, look, I don't think it's a people issue. I think it's a policy issue. I think you take the United States, for example, which is really the perspective I can only speak from. Our issue is we've not been able to get any massive immigration reform through policy. And so what we've been doing for a number of years is patchwork. And that patchwork has sent, certainly the wrong messages to the domestic audience, wrong messages to the external audience. And there's been inconsistencies in how we've applied that policy over the course of a number of years. So while certainly some will classify good versus bad immigration, for me it's really about policy. And on that, it's about institutions too, right? I mean, we talk about rule of law, and I think the bigger challenge is the resiliency in the institutions that we rely on to govern and enforce rule of law. Challenges in the way we administer justice, right? For example, are big issues that we're facing all across the region. And so, I think that, institutions that are resilient, that are purged of politicization, apolitical institutions that play by, condition and culture to be part of the democratic process, I think, is where, I think we have the best impact on trying to tackle issues around rule of law, which continue to be incredibly evasive, just like the challenges to resilient institutions, democratic institutions throughout the region.
David, your experience living, being in a country where many people want to leave, how do you filter them?
I mean, I think as policymakers, firstly, I understand, I don't blame people who want to leave.
No,
right?
no.
There may be a rational decision in certain circumstances. I do think people need to understand fully the difficulties and dangers of the journeys they undertake, and we need to do what we can to protect them and to tackle the gangs that are involved in this, whether that's in Central America, whether that's over this side of the ocean. I think there's a long-running debate about students and the way that overseas students are or aren't counted in immigration figures. I think we do try to, as sort of diplomats, as practitioners, we do try, going back to Brian's comment earlier, we do try to be aware of all these different links that we have, not just the ones that run through the embassy, the sort of classic diplomatic political links, but the business links, the civil society, the academic, the students, and so on. We work in a structured way on some of those through having achieving scholarships, which are aimed at enabling overseas students to come and study for a year in the UK on a master's and then go back and contribute to the development of their country. Through sponsoring programs and projects aimed at the development of the countries that we're serving in, sometimes with British NGOs. Equally, I think part of the value of those links is that they are organic, right, and that they're not tools of the state, that actually, and we've seen this, going back to Sudan, even through all the years we had very difficult political relationships. The British Museum had an ongoing collaboration with the Museum of Anthropology in Khartoum, because that was nothing to do with the government, right? And it was valued on both sides. Unfortunately, we ended up in a place for a while in the political relationship where we could actually celebrate that link. But there are lots of these kinds of links that do need to be independent of government. The only thing I think is sometimes when we think about them in a very tactical way, but perhaps not in an overarching strategic way, and I think we could do a little bit more of that.
I'd like to open up the audience.
I find it interesting what you just said there, because when you look at African leaders, many of them in the 70s, 80s, and 90s were sent to Russia. And that is one of the reasons why Russia's got such a firm hold on the African continent. How do we, rather than just doing this never-ending game of ping-pong with disinformation and just the information warfare that we're having now, how do we reinstigate truthfulness and cooperation between nations and not have this thing where we're trying to have an ideological battle which, throughout the 20th century, never ended?
Question now. Take 3 questions.
Thank you for your presentation. Basically, you touched on the rule of law. During the war on terror, there was what we call the lawfare system, where terrorist financing was used to address terrorist financing. How can policy, especially international policy, be amended to address the issue of lawfare against the rule of law? Because another strategy of the PLA, which is the Chinese, is media, psychological, and legal warfare. So if we're talking about the rule of law and we don't address the issue of lawfare, then I think that we may be missing it, because we are undermining the same system that we have championed, the West has championed. And during the war on terror, we used constructive lawfare, but now it's being used by the PLA against the West through psychological maneuvers and legal warfare.
Okay, who would like to? David?
Okay, I'll
start.
He had a.
There's a third one here.
Oh,
There's
sorry.
one here.
Sorry.
There's a third one.
Okay.
Sorry, never feel more on the spot. Question. Since the last probably 20, 30 years, some would argue that state of the foreign policy, UK, US, and basically Western, it's much more shifted from the policy of action and actually proper points of the policy to pay for delay, as some would say, for the points of the, conflicts coming up. We used to have, when there was conflicts happening, for example, in Bosnia, there was actually the action happening. Now we have an example of Venezuela. We're just literally waiting for them to solve themselves. It seems like the West, when we used to be area of action and we used to help the world to help with democracy and to have the civil societies, it seems we withdrew with that because that comes with the responsibility of that. It seems now the Russia, China, Iran coming to these countries just to influence them more, and we as the West are losing on that kind of policies because we just prefer to pay for delay of the any problems happening, trying to go for a very doormat approach on it. So how would you think why the policy changed from the last 20, 30 years?
I can take that one and disinformation.
Take that one?
And then
Yeah.
maybe just to address the last one, I don't think that's an active decision on the UK's part. Firstly, actually, on Venezuela, we've played quite a vocal role in terms of condemning Venezuela's actions and standing up for Guyana. We've done that very strongly, but also Brazil is there. People in the countries in the region, Brazil is brokering that agreement. We've been very, very clear. So if I understand your question correctly, I don't think we're sitting back passively watching this and watching anything unfolding in the world. We've been very active in our support of Ukraine, and that will continue under a Labour government. We will absolutely be on the side of Ukraine. Ukraine will win this war against Putin, the illegal invasion of Ukraine, and we are absolutely determined to ensure that happens and the right support gets to Ukraine. I think what has happened is that over the last few years, well, we had, how many years is it? 8 years since the Brexit referendum. We have been subsumed in the UK with a government that's been looking inward, looking in at ourselves, not facing outward. We have, as a Conservative government, just dealt a number of blows to ourselves. And that is not what we want. We need a progressive, outward-looking government to build those relationships, build the positive relationships, collaborations, ensure that we have a strong NATO, that NATO is there fundamentally to protect the West against those dangers, but making sure that we are building those collaborations and partnerships across Latin America, across the Caribbean, across the rest of the world, where we can, talking to our partners, but ensuring that progressive values lie at the heart of all of that. And that's what Labour will do in government. We will not be looking inward. We will be reaching out to our friends, to our allies, finding common ground and working with and in partnership, creating trading relationships, building up partnerships through universities, through our language, the English language, widely spoken, our schools, our British Council schools, for example, the BBC. The BBC is one of the most commonly understood and listened to stations across the whole, I can't remember, I think it's something like 18.3 million people in Latin America listen to the BBC. That's fun, that's British. We need to be ensuring that we are respecting those soft powers, but also protecting them. I'm not sure that the Conservative government has done much in the way of doing that. So that's how I would answer that. But I think just to add on the disinformation, I think we are reaching a point where that's a very, very dangerous, critical point in our future. We need to guard against disinformation. We need to make sure that our social media is protected against that. We've seen too many elections across the world destabilized by disinformation. We're seeing it played out towards people in Russia, for example, people across the African nations. We're seeing disinformation played out. And, you know, yes, they might have been sent to school or university in Russia, but they've also get Russian TV played directly into their homes, and they're listening to that propaganda. That is disinformation direct. We're hearing it and seeing it all the time. There needs to be an active policy and processes safeguarding ourselves and our allies against that. But part of that is about building those relationships and having that trust. We as a country, we've lost that trust. We've got to rebuild it, and only by doing that, then we can start to build that good in the world, because I think most people, they don't want wars, they don't want conflict. We want to come together, building those trading relationships and having better lives, tackling the emergencies, the crises, that we are facing, like the climate crisis, ensuring that communities across the world are safe from that, from sea level rise, from droughts, from forest fires, and from storms. So I think that is what a Labour government will ensure that we put first and foremost.
Vitoria?
Just to put a
Sorry.
fire,
After,
Yeah,
sorry.
after
just to
Vitoria.
put a fire on that, Anna mentioned to protect elections. Maybe we didn't protect when we had the Brexit.
Yeah?
And maybe we learned it. I don't know. But I think that we missed that.
Just some quick responses to the question on information. I mean, look, the disinformation landscape has been wild for a number of years. What's changing is the pace and reach and the technologies that are proliferating information. I also think we got to be very thoughtful and intentional about the way we delineate propaganda from disinformation, from misinformation. And I think we tend to lump it all together, and I think there's some inherent challenges to that. So we have to be very cautious. And I think it's going to get far more sophisticated with AI and deep fakes. And so it's an issue that I think policymakers all over the world have to really start tackling. And I think they have to think about not just the origination of content and the way we deliver communication, but also the consumer behavior and how we educate people to be more thoughtful in terms of what sources they go to. So, I mean, but it is a massive issue. And it is an issue in which all of the nations that we've talked about throughout the day are competing in that information space. Some are competing through disinformation, intentional, proliferation of bad information. Some are competing through propaganda, promoting their values and their belief systems as the dominant, value and belief system. And so I think, again, I don't have a solution. It's a really complex problem. It's going to get more complex, okay? On your question, that was a very thoughtful question. I wouldn't necessarily frame it as action in action. I think action has evolved. In the time in which we were, so the United States comes out of the Cold War. In some way, it declares a big victory. And then it begins grappling with this sort of identity of what's next. And that's when you started to see U.S. policy framing the U.S. as the international police, in which the United States, during the Clinton administration, engaged in more countries with military personnel than any president combined in history. Right? I mean, we were in Bosnia, Kosovo. I was there on the ground. Somalia, Rwanda. I mean, we were all over the place, in a very direct and kinetic way in which we had troops on the ground. And that backfired on the United States in very consequential ways. You break it, you fix it. And the United States was finding itself engaged deeply in these countries and then having to shape political outcomes that weren't sustainable. And so I think there's been an evolution in thinking in terms of allowing countries to kind of grapple with these problems, and our action is no longer as invasive as it used to be. It's a different approach in which you're kind of building around the edges when the opportunities are there. And you bring up Venezuela, and that's such a tough one because the United States has been, at least from a policy perspective, very absent in terms of engagement, right? There's nothing to engage on, minus the efforts to restore democracy and the sanctions have been, you can place your value judgment on that, but they haven't been effective. That's the bottom line. But I think action has taken a different form. It's no longer, boots on the ground. And you brought up a very thoughtful question on lawfare, which I think we're still trying to understand, what exactly is lawfare and how do nations leverage law to allow them to play on the edges, right, in ways that allow them to achieve foreign policy objectives. And I think this is where you see China excelling incredibly well, in which they're able to leverage law or lawfare, if you want to use such a term, in ways that advance their foreign policy interests at the expense of others that aren't necessarily going to play in that domain of law. And so I think there's still a lot to understand, but it's also about sort of the loopholes in law that allow those countries to sort of exploit in order to sort of advance objectives. So I think, again, that's going to be that issue of lawfare is going to be, we're starting to look at it a lot in sort of U.S. academic institutions to try to better understand the concept scientifically, but also understand how countries leverage and where the gaps are and how you policy against it.
David?
Thank you. On disinformation, I think really, really interesting. Obviously, it's a key part of our job as diplomats is tackling disinformation. I think there are three main things I'd point to. One is making sure we act with, not just as diplomats, but as representatives of the UK, of the West, act with transparency and integrity. You don't fight disinformation with disinformation. The second is around media, free press, investigative journalism, fact-finding services, and government transparency. And it is worrying. A lot of countries in Latin America, the indicators on those things are moving in the wrong direction. That's not helping, and we need to think more about what we can do to help move them back in the right direction. And I think the third thing is all the people-to-people and soft power links that we've been talking about, because they help to break down those misunderstandings. They help to stop propaganda, disinformation, misinformation from taking root. So I think there is a lot we can do. And finally, of course, we hope that as the technology advances, there will be some more technical solutions, as well as doubtless further technological problems as well.
Other round of questions? One at the back there. And one from,
Good afternoon, thank you. This is pretty much directed to academia, if you don't mind, Brian. So we're on internal and external elections right now. So internal to Latin America and Caribbean, last 2 years, we're very aware of the political shift and swing in Colombia, in Brazil, and most recently in Argentina, and then uncertainty last week in Guatemala. And if we look, we're very quick to have an opinion on internal elections and what it means and the impact on an external audience. So if you shift that to external elections, and if you may, I've watched you on Channel 7 in Miami most nights when you have a political opinion on the caucuses and everything else, so you're very well suited to answer this, hopefully. But from an external election perspective, we both have UK and US elections. There may or may not be a 180 swing in both directions. So from your perspective, unbiased, independent, not political, what do you assess the impact could be if there was a 180 shift in Latin America and the Caribbean, strengthening relations via diplomacy, law, and other peer relations?
Yeah, good question, Commodore. I think there's one more here, and then I'll...
we have another question here.
Thank you, Ambassador Gallagher. I'm the ambassador of Costa Rica here in the UK, and we had the honor of having Ambassador Gallagher here for many years and really taking advantage of his knowledge and of his friendship. So it's so glad to see you again. It's maybe an open-ended question, but, and the ambassador will know, have been in Central America. Costa Rica is a very stable country. We are the longest standing democracy in Latin America. We abolished the army 75 years ago, and a lot of the resources have been directed towards education and health. And actually, that has allowed us to be, I think, the 4th country in Latin America to join the OECD. Now, having said that, now we are really facing complicated times because I would say 2 issues. The migration issue, we mentioned Venezuela, some other countries, that come through, for our neighbor, Panama, talking about the environment, Dana, the Darien is really being destroyed. The amount of people that are going through there is really destroying that, which is really a pity. And our country, we are a middle-income country, so we sometimes have the issue that we're not going to receive enough or support. And we are now, I was just there on holiday, and it's very sad to see a lot of people from Venezuela in the streets and everything, and it goes beyond what we can do. So that's one question. How can a country in our situation, and how can we deal with that? Obviously, there are causes that, have to be addressed, political, economically. And so that definitely is a problem, compounded with the fact that also from the south, and we are a transit country of the drugs going up to the big market there, and this has created also a problem. We used to be 3-4 years ago, a country where, you know, the ratio that they have in homicides per 100,000, maybe we weren't even 8. And this last year, we went up to about 17. And this is not, 85% is related to gangs, but of things that are going through there, and it's really complicating the situation. So my question, or just your comments, how do we, support these issues? How do we, focus on these very complicated problems that are external to us and are really, affecting maybe our model of development that I believe, we stand on shoulders of people that took good decisions, not to say on matters of climate, etc. But that was basically my comment.
Do we have room for one more question? Okay.
Thanks very much. Absolutely fascinating. The current situation in the Middle East is said to be losing the West, the Global South. Now, I appreciate the Global South is a big place and fairly diverse. And on a domestic front, there doesn't seem to be even a microscopic difference between the current government and a potentially future government, who are both in lockstep on that one. How much is that affecting the Global South? I mean, we've seen South Africa engaging in what's very clearly lawfare because the US yet again has been using its veto in the UN, which is the seat of, nationally, where the ultimate rule of law should be happening. And from a sort of professional point of view, how much do you think that's going to play out against individual British, American, etc. interests within the region?
Okay, let's go clockwise this time, so you start, and we have about 7 minutes.
Okay, I'll take the first one quick. In Commodore, I thought we agreed no hard questions. Apparently, no. Look, I think Nick did an exceptional job this morning talking about what a Trump administration might look like in terms of policy. And by the way, we've been there before, right? And so I think if that's the question, if we had a 180 in the United States and Trump is elected in November of 2024, how might that change dynamics in the region? And again, I think there's a degree of continuity in U.S. policy in Latin America, which is really about strengthening partnerships, deepening, again, institutional building. I think there are some threads of continuity that will persist, whatever happens. I think what might change is the thematic focus. I think immigration will become, a priority for that administration, much like it was before, and you'll see a more hardline approach against Central American governments and sort of a push from the administration to deal with that. I think, sort of drugs and thugs may come back on the radar in a more robust way. We saw that during a Trump administration also. I think some of the relationship dynamics might change. The fact that, you have Petro, Lula, Milei, and of course Bukele, that relationship dynamic might change based on the alignment, political affiliation they might have with the United States. So I definitely think there's going to be threads of continuity, which focuses on institutions and focus on partnerships and relationship building. But I think there are going to be thematic changes in which if a Trump administration comes in 2025, takes office in 2025, then the challenge is, the emphasis of the administration is going to change slightly, I think.
I think that immigration definitely will change in the U.S. if Trump gets, and then I see that as an opportunity here, to tell you the truth, because if we want the legal immigration that we were talking before, with the good brains to come, then we have a chance to steal from the U.S. because nowadays the option U.S. is better than the option here. Cost-wise, opportunities, they are looking for the U.S. better than here. We are losing this market. And answering the ambassador of Costa Rica, it's really sad, I think, that the country is suffering that much with this displacement of people passing through the country. I don't think anybody would have a formula to say what to do. I think that it would be more interesting to have, I would say, a brainstorm about this, because it is This is something that is really shocking to have a country that Costa Rica, for me, always being like a model in Latin America, and suffering because all the other countries would be like to be fought. What can we do with these immigrants that are passing through here or passing and stopping? Because if we also just passing maybe could be, but I know they are passing and stopping. So are they qualified? Can we make them work here in their professions? No, they are not, they can't. So what we can do with them, can we then make them maybe able to contribute to the society and the community, qualifying them, giving them some education? It's a very complicated matter, and I was not aware that the problem was this level, so sorry to hear. But I don't think that we would have a proper, like a recipe to a solution. I think that would be much more complicated and will need to be brainstormed. I'm so sorry.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I was aware of this problem. I remember just over a year ago being in Panama, along with all the British ambassadors from Central America. We were in the Panamanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and they were very clear about the scale of the problem and so on. It's clearly very complicated, it's clearly multifaceted, and the solutions need to be multiple, including through the provision of humanitarian assistance. I think I'm going to use a phrase that's not very, well, no one was expecting to hear in a Latin America Security Conference: African solutions to African problems. That doesn't mean no one else helps, but I'm going to go back to when I worked in Liberia, and the US played a leading role. We were playing a leading role next door in Sierra Leone. There was lots of development money coming in from the UK, from the EU, and so on. But ECOWAS, the West African Regional Organization, played a key role. They played a key role in getting Charles Taylor to stand down and go into exile. They played a key role then in putting the first peacekeepers on the ground, and in then keeping that political transition process for the next 2 years on track. Every time it looked like it was going off the rails, corruption, the disarmament program, stalling, whatever, they were there and they were actively engaged. And I just wonder whether there is more that some of the regional countries can do to solve some of the problems in the source countries of these. And I know there are some very admirable examples of people trying to help in Haiti and so on. But I wonder how we can work together to resolve some of the problems in the source countries of these flows.
Well, I was actually last week meant to be in Costa Rica and Panama to see myself some of the scale of the problem here. Unfortunately, I was called back or stopped from going because of this ridiculous Rwanda vote last week. But that as it may, we've had regular discussions about the issue. I'm well aware of it, and it is a problem that needs addressing. And I think the ambassador is right. It needs some localized solutions. But we can't forget that Britain's relationship with countries across that region is so vital to ensure a building of confidence, but also support, also trading relationships, making sure that there is the democratic values are being upheld in the countries, those difficult, tricky countries, that we need to ensure those relationships are there. And I think we can play a role. Britain, historically, has had a much stronger, greater relationship with the whole of Latin America. I think we need to get back there. And if we get back to that, building those strong relationships, trading relationships, benefiting here at home as well from some of that. You know, we can sell that in to people here at home. The green energy transition, there's green hydrogen opportunities, there's the whole of minerals that are across the whole of Latin America. There are opportunities, but we must do that mindfully and aware of the people in local communities, making sure people benefit, making sure people get those important quality jobs that they then won't need to flee and get out of those countries and flee across Panama and Costa Rica, making sure that they are rewarded and we're building that strong, sustainable relationship right across the region. That's what I would say to you.
Thank you very much, Anna.
Thank you.
I'm glad you ended on that positive note. And I think Latin America, as was said this morning, particularly by the Brazilian ambassador, it's a very peaceful part of the world in terms of we haven't had wars for a long time. We have this great contribution to decarbonization, which Anna's just made. And also it's also a continent where there's quite a lot of joie de vivre, which I think can do anyone quite a lot of good. Thank you very much for a terrific panel.